Hello and welcome to another episode of the Opus Well Style Podcast. My name is Iván Watanabe, here with a great guest of ours, Mitch Spolan.
That's right, yeah.
Mitch Spolan. So Mitch, friend of the firm's, joining us today to talk a little bit about the company, Payorology. We had a conversation a few months ago, and absolutely love the concept. A good portion of our practice here at Opus is in the medical space, and so I really wanted to have you get the opportunity to kind of share what you're up to, the company, and the value that you're sort of finding out in the marketplace. So I'm psyched to have you on.
Thank you so much for having me, Iván. I'm very excited to be here.
Definitely. Well, Mitch, before we start, why don't you just kind of tell the audience a little bit about you, your professional background, kind of how you got to the place where you're at now, and just sort of set the stage for us.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, this Payorology is actually my third career. I started my career as an architect, which is logical as to why we're talking right now. But I began my career as an architect, specializing in architectural acoustics of all things. One of the reasons why we're sitting in a recording studio right now, I got to play architect for my daughter. And then, like most architects that I know, after practicing for 4 years, I made the logical next step to join this large internet firm called Yahoo, and transitioned from architecture to the internet, and spent really over a dozen years at Yahoo from 98 through 2011, really. And then went to another internet firm, internet company called Living Social. So if you remember those lovely daily deals you used to get in your inbox, so it was Living Social and Groupon days, fun days. And then was there for a handful of years, and then went to another internet company that was in the edtech space called Chegg, and spent another decade there. So I went from architecture to the internet space for 26 years. And now I started Payorology, and which was a kind of a culmination of what I've learned along the way about my interests, to be honest, my kids' interests, and saw an opportunity. I think my whole career, really my whole life, has been about recognizing opportunity, which is how I got into the internet from architecture. So I saw an opportunity, had a lot of bad ideas along the way, but when I saw this opportunity to start Payorology, it kind of just, everything fell into place, and was able to leverage what I've learned, but still learn something new. I always want to learn something new. If I'm ever the smartest person in the room, I got to find another room. So I always want to try to learn new things, and I learn something new every day.
So, Mitch, you had shared with me a little bit about how you got the idea for the company, and it really comes from your relationship with your kids, which I love. So I'd love it if you share with the audience a little bit about kind of how this idea came about, and what drove you to start the company.
Yeah, no, it very much is about our kids. I knew when I've always had the itch to start a company. I always knew that I wanted to be an entrepreneur, even though I spent the last 30 years of my career working for big companies, couple of public companies, a startup, an architecture firm. I knew I always wanted to start my own thing. And I just didn't know what I wanted to do. I wanted to continue to learn, and I wanted to do something to help people, but I still wanted to leverage what I've learned along the way. So I just found myself reading a ton. I read everything. I read about things that interest me, and then I started reading about things that interest my kids. And I have a son. Our son is an economics major at University of Maryland, so I read about economics. He's an entrepreneurship minors. We have that. I definitely have some DNA together. So we both share that passion. So he's an economics major. My daughter's pre-med, so she wants to be a surgeon, and she's pre-med at University of Florida, where I went. So I read about the medical field and healthcare. So it didn't take long before I read about economics, and I read about medicine before I got to healthcare economics. And one of the things that I read that really fascinated me was, well, a couple things. One, I couldn't understand why I was reading about all these private medical groups and private medical practices that were closing. They were unable to really keep their doors open. And much of what I read was because they were being paid the same, or reimbursed, I should say, from insurance companies, the same that they were when they opened their doors 20 years ago. And at the same time, I was reading about a new law that kind of rolled out over 3 years, but took full effect just January 1st of last year, 2024. It's called the Transparency and Coverage Final Rule. And that law has a ton of different aspects. It was really originally set up so that patients would be able to find the best place to have a procedure. So if you need a shoulder surgery and you had a certain insurance, should you go to this hospital? Should you go to that hospital? Which would have the least out of pocket, and really allow patients to effectively shop for their healthcare. But what really intrigued me was that while that was an incredibly noble pursuit, that we could potentially leverage this data in a different way. Leverage this data to help those medical groups that were being forced to close to understand how their rates that they were being reimbursed by the payers of the insurance companies, how they compared to their peers in the market. So if you're a cardiologist in Atlanta, how are other cardiologists in Atlanta being reimbursed from Aetna, from United Healthcare, from Cigna, et cetera? So it was really my kids that spawned the idea for Payorology, and it really is helping people. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I have a conversation with a medical group or medical practice that literally tell me they haven't had a raise in their reimbursement rate in 20 years. It is mind-boggling to me. And yet year after year, of course I read this as well, you would read about the incredible profits of the major payers. So it seemed like there was an opportunity to help. And thankfully, we have been successful in really helping medical practices grow.
Yeah. I mean, it's absolutely wonderful news to hear. I mean, we work, like I said, with a whole bunch of physicians, and I think most physicians would admit this, and that includes my wife, that many of them are not sort of really financially literate. They're not business people. They didn't get into medicine for, learning the business side. It's certainly not taught in medical school. And so you just want to open a practice to be able to help as many people as possible and ultimately, turn a profit. But that running a business is not something that they are familiar with. And so empowering them with this data and your technology and your assistance to negotiate those rates, has a trickle-down effect to not just these physicians, the nurses, the staff, but also for patient care, right? I mean, it just, you are potentially having doctors that can spend more time with you because the per patient visit is now more profitable for them than it was before, right? So how could you not get more care, right? Or see more patients, and more people are impacted. So it's just a wonderful thing that I think you guys are rolling out. And obviously it has a great economic benefit, but it's certainly helping an issue that's in the industry and these days is really widely talked about.
No, you nailed it. I mean, our goal is really to help the medical practice grow and be able to provide the absolute best care possible. I don't want to go to my doctor and have them thinking about how they're going to pay the rent, how they're going to hire more nurses, how they're going to give their staff raises, how they're going to invest in better equipment. I want them thinking about how they can help my family, the patients, myself, if I'm going to I don't want them to worry about that. And it is unbelievable when you get into the data to see the differences between the rates that different medical practices have. And we do a lot of work with physical therapy practices, and it is, I mean, their equipment, they want to have new equipment. They want to have the best environment for their patients to thrive and grow and feel better and believe that they can walk again or get rid of their back pain. We just want to help them be successful so that they can provide the best possible care. And it's, again, when we started the company, it was about, one of the requirements was, what can we do to help people? Like, is there, we, look, I've been very fortunate in my life to work with for some great companies. And I'm always going to be a husband and a father first, family first for me. I'm just a family first guy, as are my co-founders. So, but when it's my time and it's like I go to work, how I choose to spend my day and what I invest my time and effort in, I want to do something that can help people. Yeah. And we've been very fortunate that when we get that phone call from our client and they said that they were successful and they were able to increase their reimbursements when they haven't been able to previously, it is, I mean, it's like another 10 logs on the fire. We get so excited.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, I think just the data in general is so valuable, and I'm happy to see that it's been transparent and there's a company out there that can help, you know, again, practices that are not super well versed in finance that kind of understand it. Do you see, for the most part, that like older practices are the ones that are the most challenged, and maybe a newer practice has dealt with sort of more competitive rates? Like, you know, if I started my practice 20 years ago and somebody started it 10 years ago and somebody started it 2 years ago, is that the earlier companies are the little bit more reasonable of negotiated rates, or what are you finding?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, yes and no. I think that there are when we look at the data, so I guess I'll take a step back. So when a patient goes to see their doctor, everything that the doctor does while they're at the practice has a code associated to it. So let's say, for example, you go to a doctor for the first time and you have a 30-minute office visit. Well, because you're a first-time patient, that would be 99203. If you come back to that doctor, you're no longer a first-time patient because you like the doctor, you come back, and you have another 30-minute office visit, that's a different code. That's 99213. So there are probably 20 codes, depending upon and obviously different codes for every specialty, that the practice that basically makes up 80% of their revenue. So we focus on those codes. When you look at those codes in aggregate, you will start to see tiers. You will see like a kind of like a base rate or a street rate that if a new practice was going to open their doors, they're probably say, I'm going to accept Aetna, I'm going to get credentialed with Aetna or United Healthcare, Cigna, whatever it is, any payer, any commercial payer. They will likely be at the street rate or the base rate unless they are really incredibly powerful and good negotiators, then they can get higher rates. If they know, if the payer believes that they have such a footprint that they must have them, maybe they're getting a little bit above that. But when we look at the data, we will see the vast majority. It's almost like the mode in statistics. It's like the most common rate. But what we will also see are these different tiers that present themselves. Okay? So, and I can't tell you why, but people like to negotiate in zeros and fives. So we will see 15% above this, or 20%, or 30%, or 45%. It's very consistent. You start to see these trends. And what we're able to do for our clients is to analyze the codes that they care about, whether they're a well-established practice or a brand new practice, and understand, are they at the base tier? Are they at the street tier? And really, if I look at the different practices that are at these higher tiers, which one do they look like? Do they which one has the same number of providers, has the same number of locations, is in a high populated area, that has the same number of experienced providers? Like what is the makeup of the practice? And then we can advise our clients as to say, hey, you really should argue and negotiate for this, and I can give you and help you provide that story as to why this makes sense. And you know, I think the story is very much around where I have spent my career. I mean, even as an architect student. And when I was in architecture, I had to listen and respond and explain why my design made sense. When I was in When I was working for internet companies before this, I had to explain and listen and understand the problem and explain how I might be able to help. This is the same thing. This is really just applying it to a medical practice to understand where they stand and how they could potentially position themselves with the payer to explain why they deserve to be at the rates of their peers. When the provider or medical practice can go to the payer and present data to them that shows their peers and the codes that they care about and how much their peers are being reimbursed down to the penny, it is a very strong negotiating position for the practice. And I will tell you that the most common response by the payer at that point in time is, where did you get this data? That is the number one response. We hear it all the time. And it makes me smile, because the reason why they're saying that is that in every medical practice's contract that they have with their payers, there is a clause that says you can't talk about your rates. You can't tell anybody about your rates. So their first automatic response is, where'd you get this? Like, you're breaking the contract. You're not allowed to talk about rates with your peers. And what we counsel our clients to say is, this is on your website. It's your data. We downloaded it and processed it and read it, and it's your data, which kind of stops them in their tracks, because it's just leveraging price transparency data in a way to help providers versus the other noble pursuits of why this law has come to be. Sorry, I get excited about this stuff.
No, I mean, listen, I think it's incredibly empowering, right, for the practices, because without the data, they don't have any leverage.
Oh, no, nothing.
Right?
Nothing.
There's zero leverage. What are you going to base it off of? There's no negotiating stronghold to be able to have that conversation. So having the data is a large part of it. But then I think what you've also mentioned is building the story and understanding the data, so that here's what the data is, but here's also where we think we should be, right? And crafting that language and crafting that negotiating sort of conversation, I think, is the other part of the equation that you seem to be helping them with. So, really
for
closing
sure.
that loop. Again, I could do as much as I want with the data, but if I don't know how to present it to the insurance carrier in a way that's going to, help me negotiate, then it's worthless, frankly.
Well, it goes back to your original point, right? Doctors didn't go to medical school to make presentations and to necessarily run a business. They wanted to help people. They just wanted to help people. Whether you're a physical therapist or a cardiologist or a surgeon, they just went to school to help people. And this is not what they do. This is what we do. This is what we do. So we can understand the data first and foremost. And our goal, look, there's a ton of aspects to price transparency and the transparency and coverage final rule. We do one thing and only one thing. The one thing that we do in the one area that we focus on in transparency and coverage is the fact that payers are required by law every month to post how much they pay every provider in their network on their website. All we want to do is be the best in the world at understanding that data set so that we can extract the story that we can help our clients tell, because it's a valid, well thought out, strategic, thoughtful, intelligent discussion with a payer that makes it a very difficult situation for a payer to argue with.
Yep.
And that's what we do. That is our role in this healthcare world.
I love it. And what's an ideal practice client look like for you? Who have you found to see the most benefit? What is there a demographic or some sort of metrics that you use where you think you can really help these particular folks?
Yeah. It's a good question. So, I mean, usually our practices are at least 25 providers. I think that can fluctuate a little bit. It really depends on the location. So, for example, if you have a fewer providers, but you're in a regional area and there's just not a lot of other providers that are in your specialty, that's okay. We can still help. But we find ourselves working even more with practices that have around 25 providers or more.
So you mentioned medical practices and physical therapy practices. Are there any other industries or any other types of businesses that you're working with?
Well, yes. I mean, we help primarily medical groups, but we help practices that invest in medical groups, that provide services for medical groups. So there are a lot of phenomenal firms out there that invest in certain specialties. So we'll provide services to them to help provide better results to the practices that they invest in. What I will say that while our core business is really helping medical groups and medical practices negotiate with payers, we have been able to leverage price transparency data to help practices that are much, much smaller. And look, when we started the company, the thesis was that price transparency data would be the only real use was to renegotiate contracts. And we were wrong, just wrong. It's still the number one use case by far. But our clients are so creative and asking the questions like, could we do this or could we do that, that we've been able to leverage the price transparency to help practices in different ways. And I'll give you an example that has helped practices that are much smaller. So let's say, for example, we have some practices that are currently out of network. So, they have chosen, because the rates have been so low, that they just can't take the in-network rates, and they leave the payer and they go out of network. They'll still see them, but they're in the outer network portion for the patient. So then they start to ask us, well, what if we were to go in network? Where should we go in network? So again, as to your earlier question, if a practice opens their door, they might just get their street rate. So what we will do prior to that practice going and exploring with the payer whether they should go in network again, we'll go into the data and look at peers that look like them, and it could be small practices, and understand if there's a story to be or an argument to be made so that if they do go back in network, where they should go back in network, at what rate should they go back in network. So if there's a tier or two or three above the street rate or the base rate that they could argue for, and if they were able to achieve that rate, then they go back in network. So we're able to advise them. We help other groups. You had asked about other groups that we work with. We have practices that we work with, not medical practices, but investors that are looking to open practices in other states or in other areas of the state that they're currently in. So we'll do an evaluation for them about, what do rates look like in that part of the state or in a different state. We'll help them if two practices are considering merging, or one practice is thinking about acquiring another practice. We can go in and evaluate the rates that they have. Oftentimes, there are partnerships that hospital systems or health systems want to make with doctors or providers or outpatient providers or ambulatory surgical centers or whatever. We can go in and look at the rates of the health system and the hospital system so that we can understand before you get to the step of a black box, which is when there's a third party involved, and like the hospital system or the health system will provide their data and the practice will provide their data. And then the third party will evaluate what a partnership might look like. And those black boxes exist because historically, again, you weren't allowed to share your rates. But now, because of price transparency, effectively, we can provide the answers to the test before you pick up the pencil. Like, we know what the rates are going to be for both parties.
Mitch, as we kind of wrap up the conversation, it's been super interesting. And again, I really appreciate everything that Payorology is doing in this space, because I really think that you're driving some significant benefit to the practices and also the community. So, but as we wrap it up, are there any things you want to make sure that the listening audience kind of takes away, either about the business or about the industry or about what you guys are up to?
Yeah. Thanks, Iván. Look, I think that, well, let me put it to you this way. When we download and process all this data, there's one column in the data set that always makes me laugh or gives me pause, and it just shows how much opportunity there is. There is one column in all data files that says there's about the expiration rate. And the expiration rate on the data, on the rates that we're studying. And that expiration date is always the same. It's 12/31/99. Okay? And that's not 12/31/2099. That is literally in the file. It says 12/31/9999. So when I see that, what that tells to me, look, it's the rate until it's not the rate. The first step is being willing to raise your hand and say, look, we got to talk about this. These rates are not like a great partnership has to work for all sides. And right now, the default is that it works for the payer. It works for the insurance company. It's got to work for the practice. It has to work for the providers. It has to enable them to not be concerned about paying rent. They have to be able to focus on the care of their patient. And the first step is the willingness to ask. And if you're going to ask, make sure you're prepared. Have that knowledge and the data to support your ask, because you can ask for anything and, people could say no. But if you are going to make that ask, have the data, understand where you stand, make a strong argument, and, that's what we help with. That's what we are driven by. That's our passion. And we just want to help practices grow in any way that we can.
So if you want to reach out to Mitch, feel free to reach out to him at Mitch, M-I-T-C-H, at Payorology, Payorology.com. We'll also make sure to tag Mitch on all of our posts, and you can listen to him or reach out to him via social media. All right. Mitch, really appreciate you for joining the podcast. And for you, the listening audience, thanks for tuning in.